When two different people claim to be in charge of the same project, the results are rarely good. What happens when it's a dozen people? Welcome back to Neuroconversion Leadership, where we help you connect with people who think, work, and see the world differently. Whether you're a project leader, a technical executive, or a product manager, your role requires you to deal with people who have a wide range of communication styles. Getting everyone engaged and pulling in the same direction can be quite a challenge, but it can be done. I'm Jeremy Doran, and I love to help leaders learn to communicate across communication styles. And that's what this podcast is all about. While we're at it, it's also what my recently published book is all about. If you know someone who could benefit from reading a book about communication and leadership, drop me a line. I'll send you a promo code so that you can get 2 for the price of 1. That way you can send one to your friend and keep one for yourself. Americans have been using healthcare.gov for almost 13 years now, and the portal itself is now quite stable and effective, but that was not the case in the beginning. While the project was failing, a journalist went looking for who was actually in charge of the project. What he found was that a dozen different people all claimed managerial responsibility. A dozen people claiming to be in charge means that it was a rudderless ship. In case you didn't read my article this week on stakeholder alignment, the idea is that a shared goal is not the same as an agreement of what success looks like. Today, we're going to discuss a classic example at the largest scale possible. Billions of dollars spent and the health coverage of millions of America riding on it. On October 1st, 2013, healthcare.gov launches to the public. Within hours, it's crashing, timing out, failing for nearly everyone who tries to use it. And it wasn't a coding problem, it was a coordination problem, and it started with everyone making assumptions about what success looked like. Everyone involved genuinely shared the same goal: launch a working health insurance market on schedule on October 1st. Nobody disagreed with that. But that's not where things fell apart. It fell apart in the gap underneath the goal. CMS, the agency running the project, had 3 internal factions all pulling toward the same stated goal: IT, policy, and communication. Same destination, different unstated priorities about what mattered most when something had to give. Nobody sat down and asked the questions I outlined in this week's article. What would make this a win for your team? What are you actually measuring? And what's the one thing that can't happen? Because no one asked those questions, decisions got delayed, contractors got different guidance depending on who they talked to, and the project was in disarray. And here's the view from the subcontractor side. CMS handed out 60 contracts to 33 different companies. CMS believed that the largest contractor, CGI, was the lead integrator, the one company with the authority when push comes to shove. CGI didn't believe that was their role. That's not a goal disagreement. Everyone wanted the site to launch. It's a criteria and authority gap. Nobody had agreed in advance who got to make the call when priorities collided. If you've heard of the Iron Triangle before, this next part will sound familiar. If not, the Iron Triangle is the idea that every project balances 3 constraints: scope, time, and cost. Pushing hard on one always puts pressure on the other 2. 5 months before the launch, McKinsey, an outside project auditor, warned CMS directly that the timeline didn't allow for real testing. That warning didn't fail because nobody heard it. It failed because no one had agreed in advance how much weight on schedule should carry versus actually working. End-to-end testing, which needed something like 7 months, got compressed into 1 month. Essentially, the system got tested under real load in public for the first time on launch day. The story doesn't end in wreckage, though. It ends up in a turnaround that contains some valuable lessons. An engineer named Mikey Dickerson came in on loan from Google to help fix things. His first move was not to change the coding. It had nothing to do with the code. It was fixing how people talk to each other. He set up a war room, 2 stand-ups a day, morning and evening, 45 minutes each. The morning was to surface problems, and the evening was to report what got solved. There are 2 rules that governed that room: no finger pointing and knowledge determines who talks, not rank. So if a junior engineer had the answers, that engineer outranked a senior officer who didn't, at least for that conversation. Within about 2 months, a site that had been failing everyone was now functional enough to hit its enrollment targets. Nothing about the goal changed in those 2 months. What changed is that priorities were now explicitly clear and reviewed often. Everyone had the right to speak up about issues without fear of recrimination. After I wrote this week's article, I sought out the largest scale examples I could find. The largest actually being the UK's National Savings and Investment Project, a digital modernization initiative that their own parliament called a full spectrum disaster. Following close behind that was our own healthcare.gov website, and since I live in America, I chose to focus on that, at least for today. The point from my article and from these two examples are that a shared goal is step one, but the real work and the real risk lives in the more nuanced questions that people don't ask nearly enough. What's a win for your team? What are the things you're actually measuring? And what has to be avoided in order for this project not to become a disaster? When multiple organizations or even multiple teams within one organization need to work together on a project, clear communication is crucial, and that requires 3 things. A clear decision-making process, whether one person gets to decide, and if so, who, or if there'll be some sort of voting system. Upfront and ongoing review of the criteria that define success, upfront and ongoing. And number 3, the ability for anyone to speak up or share ideas or concerns and be listened to without fear of recrimination, knowledge over rank. So if your team has a shared goal but keeps running into friction underneath it, that's usually not a motivation problem or a skills problem. It's an alignment problem, and it's fixable with some simple adjustments. There will be links in the show notes to my most recent article on this topic, as well as the Forbes article about healthcare.gov. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. I hope it was enlightening. And until next week, go connect with someone new.